Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale figure of the classic Tatooine Jawa. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. This year I'm embarking on a personal mission to open up all of my Star Wars figures, both 6-inch and 3.75-inch, that I originally intended to open up but stored away and never got around to it. But I have to say, sadly, this figure wasn't on my initial opening list. I really like the classic Kenner figures and I really wanted to keep this one as a carded example alongside the vintage backing card example, but shortly after purchasing this figure, the backing card went moldy, and we noticed that across this entire particular wave. We think that perhaps they got damp during the supply chain because it was only figures from this particular wave. We're always very careful with our carded figures, and only the figures from this wave got that mold on the backing card. So it was really heartbreaking. We intended to keep this one carded, but I'm going to turn this into a positive because my husband and I really love collecting Jawa figures and building up our Tatooine scenes. So I'm really excited to be adding this Vintage Collection Jawa to our display. He's got some really cool details. It's going to be fun. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at this Jawa figure and all of the accessories out of the packaging. But first, let's take a quick look at the backing card. The packaging for the Vintage Collection line is of course heavily inspired by the original Kenner backing cards from the 1970s and 80s. I have an example here for comparison. They are both rectangular in shape with a black background. We have the classic Star Wars logo here at the top and a double chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art here on the right. For the A New Hope wave, Kenner included a small artwork here of Luke and Leia with the lightsaber raised, but on the modern versions, Hasbro covered this up with a warning label. In later waves of A New Hope figures, Hasbro thankfully corrected this by moving that warning label down underneath the Kenner logo, which I think is a good improvement. When releasing a character that appeared in the original Kenner action figure line, Hasbro likes to recreate the same backing card by using the same image. As we can see here, it is the same promotional image of a Jawa on Tatooine, but I have to say, in improving the image quality for the modern version, this particular printed image has come across a lot more darker, so we're losing some of the original costume detail that you can still see on the original Kenner one, which I think is a shame. I'm not old enough for this to be nostalgic from my childhood, but I do like the original Kenner one more. The placement of the Jawa feels a lot more centered because this modern bubble is higher and wider. It cuts into that image a lot more because they have added a footy here that doesn't really appear quite as large on the original one. The image loss, the placement of the bubble, it just sort of throws it off a little bit. Of course, I am still quite fond of this one. It looks so fun next to the original Kenner backing card, but I just think this one had a better overall placement and I can just see more of the Jawa detail. In replicating the original Kenner backing card, Hasbro has also used yellow as the accent color for the nameplate. They both read Jawa simply in black text, and we also have a yellow accent color used behind the bubble here as well, though it's a little bit of a lighter tone yellow on the Vintage Collection version. Inside the clear plastic bubble on the front of the backing card, we can see that we have one Jawa figure with a plastic robe and 2 blaster accessories. Moving on to the back of the backing card now, this is a slightly older figure, as you can see, VC161, released when Hasbro was still doing the black backing card design here. Once again, heavily inspired by the early Kenner backing card backs, as you can see here. They both have the Star Wars logo here at the top, though for the Vintage Collection backing card it is offset to the left to avoid the cutout, and they both have the double chrome racetrack design, surrounding images of other action figures to collect with those fun, vibrant, colorful backgrounds. For the Vintage Collection backing card, we also have the Vintage Collection logo, but unlike the original Kenner backing card that showed more things to collect, unfortunately because of modern toy restrictions and advertising, we have to have copyright warning and barcode information taking up that lower section there of the backing card, but I still like the nostalgia of this section here. It's really fun to see Hasbro recreating such iconic backing cards from that original vintage Kenner era. It's just so unfortunate that my particular example suffered an unfortunate fate with this mold, but I'm looking at it from a positive side. Now I get to open up a really cool Jawa figure to add to my collection, so let's get stuck in and open it up. So now I have the Jawa figure out of the packaging, as well as the 2 blaster accessories, so we can get stuck in and check out all of the details. So normally with the human and humanoid figures, I go through the sculpting and the paintwork and then go through the articulation. But of course, Jawas are quite different. We're going to have some very different articulation. And getting it out of the packaging, I had a quick little look at the legs underneath, and I gotta say, I'm not really seeing much articulation at all. And indeed, when I go to stand it upright on the desk, it feels like it's completely resting on this plastic skirt. So even if I could move the legs, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to because they're tucked in quite deeply there, I don't think it would really matter. We do get a little bit of that left foot sticking out from that sort of raised edge there on the robe, but it's not really going to change the posing there. It's kind of sitting on a plastic column here, but I think that works for Jawas. I'm not really expecting them to do any sort of acrobatics with their legs, sort of pulling it back the skirt. And honestly, I kind of like the fact that we don't have big splits up the sides that we often do get in the plastic lower sections to allow for articulation. Sometimes it just really sort of cuts in and we lose a lot of detail there. So I'm kind of glad that we don't have those cuts up the sides. And I gotta say, this is actually quite rigid plastic. It's not that rubbery texture that we often get on the lower section of action figures that gives us a little bit of flexibility. So it's quite rigid and it just kind of sits here a little bit solid, but we do have articulation in the arms and torso, and I am assuming the head, though we've got a lot of detail around that hood, so we'll test that out. So let's go through the sculpting and paintwork first. So of course we know Jawas pretty well. They're pretty iconic in Star Wars. We've seen a lot of them in action figure form in different collectible formats, but of course I love Jawas. I love seeing the new version, so I'm quite excited to finally get my hands on this figure. He's been trapped in the bubble for quite some time. So of course we've got an iconic A New Hope Jawa with a brown robe. There's some really nice texture here on this robe. I hope that's showing up well. You can see it's actually different in different sections. We've got really large sort of a fabric grain here, and then it's smaller in certain sections, kind of like they've patched some of their robes, or it's sort of worn away and we're getting sort of a thicker sections showing. I think that that's kind of fun. It's looking a little bit tattered. And of course we've got these sort of weathering around the hem here on the sleeves and a little bit around the bottom of the robe here as well. You can kind of see it. Of course we do have a sculpted sort of line here in the front where the 2 sides of the robe are sort of closed over. So we're not really sort of getting a glimpse to any fabric or garments underneath. That's all completely sealed. It doesn't open, but it has got quite a raised lip there, which is nice. Gives us a little bit of depth. It's not just smooth all the way around. And I do like the way that the robe folds over the feet there. I think that that's quite fun, just giving it a little bit more personality and not looking just like a plastic sort of column completely all the way through there. Again, we've got some sort of wrinkling here in the back, the fabric draping it down the back. We can see that texture there. Feels really nice to sort of run your fingers over. You can really feel that texture. I like the modern era of Hasbro including a fabric grain with the sculpting of their plastic toys. I like that sort of worn edge to the hem here, sort of flowing onto the ground, which is really nice. We can see that sort of tattered hem here on the other sleeve as well. It's quite nice. Comes down quite low on the back of the hands in certain sections, a little bit lower on this one. I'm hoping we'll still be able to get to do some cool blaster poses there. So of course we've got a hood on some versions of certain Star Wars figures. The head inside is separate to the plastic hood. I noticed that on the Black Series Tikar Jawa in the 6-inch scale range. Looking at this one close up, it appears that the head and hood are sculpted together rather than the head and a plastic hood over the top of it. So I love the eyes here. So this one looks like classic yellow eyes. For Tikar in the Black Series range from the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, she has gold eyes. And of course the off-world Jawas from the Mandalorian line have red eyes. So these are the classic Tatooine ones with yellow eyes, which I like there. Those eyes look really nice, very circular and well painted. Of course, if there's one spot on a figure where we really don't want the paint to be misaligned with the sculpting underneath, it's going to be Jawa eyes. I don't want them looking a bit spooky or a little bit googly-eyed by being sort of off a center there. They look really nice. Those are quite fun. I love that vibrant yellow there. And we've got some really nice sculpting here on the hood. We've got sort of some nice scrunching going down there. We've got a sort of nice nice little curl there to the top peak of that hood there in the back, and it fits fairly nicely in amongst all of the other straps and details we've got going on here in the back. It is of course a separate piece. It's not connected completely, but it does look like it's sort of sculpted to fit around the bandolier and straps that we've got going on here, which is really quite nice. You can see the articulation in the sleeves, but it's pretty well hidden, I've got to say. I can just sort of see it here in the inside here on the elbows. We'll see it a little bit more towards the back when we start to articulate that, but overall I think that that's really nice. Let's take a closer look at the bandolier. So we've got a sort of a lighter brown bandolier slung over the body here, where we've got a number of pouches across the front with the little sort of metallic sort of closure. The little dome snap is painted, which I do like to see. It often bothers me when I can tell that there is a metallic detail on the original costume that is simply not painted on the figure. It should be a different color than the leather, and I can see that those little silver dots are nicely painted there. Most of them are lined up with the sculpting underneath, though it looks like perhaps this one here is a little bit off center, perhaps a little bit more to the right, but the other ones, especially the ones closer to the face, we were sort of drawing more focus, they look pretty well aligned, and we can see that coming round into the back. We've got a little bit more of a softer detail here. It looks like it's supposed to be a buckle of some sort perhaps, but it doesn't have any sort of additional paint detail on it, but it's kind of fun crisscrossing here in the back with the holster, which we've got slung over the left shoulder. There is a nice kind of faux leather sort of sculpting texture to it. It's a darker brown compared to the bandolier, so I like the fact that we've got a mix of colors there. We do have a small pouch here with, again, silver painted domes on the top, which I do really like. And if I can just quickly move the arm out of the way, we've got a really interesting holster here. I wasn't sure that we were going to get a holster for the larger of the two blaster accessories, the ion blaster, but it looks like this one kind of folds open to sort of fit that larger one in there. That's really interesting. Looking at the holster closer up, it looks like there are two little domes sculpted here, but they don't have a silver metallic accent on them, which is a little unfortunate, because when we look at the back, we do have two pouches up here at the top of the strap which do have them, although I think that silver paint is a little bit aligned more to the left. It's not quite right on top of the sculpting there, but of course it's on the back. I do like the leather texture we've got here. We've got another little sort of tiny little pouch detail here. But as you can see, we clearly have some numbered printing here on the back. All of these Star Wars figures have some kind of printing, which is usually on the inner thigh, which is, you know, not very visible when we're putting our action figures on display. But because of the rigid skirt here, you can't see nor access that numbering. So Hasbro has unfortunately decided to put it quite prominently on the back of the figure. So if you were buying a few of these to kind of build out a scene, maybe you'll have some facing forward, maybe you'll have some facing this way, sort of reaching towards a droid of some sort, but it's just so eye-catching. It's not even sort of stamped, it's printed, so it's just really readable, and I think that that's unfortunate. Of course, because it looks like this is made out of brown plastic, you could get adventurous and try and remove that, you know, with a chemical of sorts, but I'm a little bit nervous about doing that with my Star Wars figure, so I'm not going to do that. But it just seems a shame. We've got some really nice sculpted detail on the back of this Jawa. Sometimes figures don't look so cool from the back as they do from the front, but I gotta say there's some really cool detail here, and you do see the holster so clearly on the side, so I feel like this would be a fun pose if you're trying to mix it up and sort of put your Jawas in different poses. It's just unfortunate because it's just so high contrast that I think it's a metallic, or if it's a very light gray printing there that just really is so readable against the dark brown of that holster. It seems such a shame because they've gone to the trouble of painting those tiny little metallic domes. It's just a little unfortunate, but other than that, I really like the fact that we've got the domes. It just adds a little bit of something, because it really bothers me when you can see that these would be clearly metallic on the original costume details. They shouldn't be the same color as the leather, so I do really like that. Just perhaps maybe they could have done it for these two little domes here as well, but anyway, just sort of playing with this one. This side here feels quite rigid on the holster section, and this bit feels quite rubbery. It sort of feels like you sort of pull it open from the front, and there is just a little bit of sort of wiggle room with this because it is just a little bit rubbery. I'm kind of moving the torso backwards and forwards here because it does feel like it's sculpted separately to the torso, but it feels very attached to it. I feel like it's glued down or pegged down in certain areas because I can't sort of move it. So I'm not sure that I would be able to completely remove these straps if I was trying to change it up. And you can kind of see here, the back of the Jawa is really sculpted. That robe is sculpted to kind of fold around these straps. So even if you found a way to remove these, I think it would look odd because there'd be this sort of crisscross here in the back where the straps are sort of resting into the folds of the fabric of the robe underneath. So they look like they are sculpted to really fit in there. So moving this is just moving the torso. I'm not going to able to sort of swing that around to the back of the figure, but it is made out of that slightly flexible plastic because you can see I can kind of move it up and down, but that's not really going to give us posability. I think that's just helpful for getting the blaster in and out because of this little rubbery section here at the front. I like the dark gloves that we've got here for this Jawa, and of course I love this face. You can just make out the kind of the crisscross sort of strapping, the sort of wrappings that Jawas wear over their faces there. You can just kind of see that there. It's very dark. I do like the folds of the hood. It's just really nice. All the different hoods in Star Wars sort of have different feels. A Jawa hood is very different to Palpatine's hood, so I like the sculpting here. It just feels very Jawa, so I'm really liking the sculpting of this one. Feels very different. The Jawas of my childhood were the Power of the Force 2 ones, where they had that sort of clear section in the back of the hood, allowing light to pass through to illuminate the eyes. I always thought that was a fun trick, but I got to say the vibrant yellow on this one does a pretty good job, and we don't lose the detail on the back of the hood. Another reason why I'm just sort of disappointed that we've got this printing here, because those ones with the plastic in the back of their hoods, you can't really pose them facing from the back because you just sort of see this plastic window in the back, which isn't accurate. So if you wanted to kind of do a whole lot of Jawas cluster around droids, these would be the ones that you'd use, but now we've got this printing on the back. So I don't know, maybe if I had a few more, maybe I would be sort of adventurous enough to try and remove that, but this is the one that I have, so it'll be staying like this. So I think this is really fun. Perhaps we could have done with maybe a little bit of weathering on the robe. It doesn't look like there was any sort of airbrushing or any kind of weathering on the bottom of the robe to kind of give it maybe a dusty or a slightly dirty appearance, because of course they do steal droids, they work with a lot of mechanics and stuff like that. So perhaps we could have a little bit of sort of like a darker brown around the bottom of the robe, or perhaps like a dusty sort of Tatooine yellow sort of sandy color here. It doesn't bother me, but I know that some fans like a little bit more of sort of a weathered in-world look. This Jawa looks a little bit clean, but I like the sculpting, the texture of the fabric here. It's just got a nice level of detail, so that's pretty cool. Let's get stuck in and check out the articulation, because of course we're not really going to do much in the way of posing, but I really want to see how much we can get as sort of different looks with this one. And of course, I want to see if they're going to be able to hold those blaster accessories. So starting out with the head, we've got this bandolier sitting really high and close up to the hood. So I'm not sure how much we're going to turn, because we've got this peak here in the back and then these pouches here. So I do want to be able to turn it, but I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to. So if I'm looking out over the shoulder, you can kind of see the neck, the way that the sculpting is there for the robe. It's sort of exposing a little bit there. I can just kind of get it to look out over the shoulder, but I am kind of lifting it up a little bit. You can start to see sort of underneath a little bit, and we've got the hood resting on the shoulder strap there. And I'm not sure how much I'm going to turn it this way. That is just going to pop completely off. You can see the articulation attachment point there. And yeah, so it's not really designed to turn too much. It feels very easy to pop that off just as soon as I get to that point. So I'm getting to there. That's about as much as I can turn the Jawa head to the right before I can sort of feeling it start to lift off. And again, to the left, it's getting to about there before it starts to feel like it's lifting off. So it's not really got a lot of articulation there. But of course, I do like the way the sculpting just fits in amongst those straps. So for me personally, I don't mind it. I know that these straps are going to be sort of an annoyance for people that really want to get different poses. But personally, I just like the way that the hood sits in amongst those straps. straps. I don't mind the fact I can kind of get just a little bit of a sort of a turn here or there. Yeah, it's still nice. It's kind of funny the fact that we've got such a maneuverable attachment point, but the sculpting of the hood just means that we're not really going to get much in the way of different poses there. Moving on to the sleeves, you can see the articulation here at the shoulders. That was very easy. Let's check out the other side. Very easy. This strap here just comes out a little bit further over the sleeve than we have on this side. So I can get this arm up just a little bit higher than I can on this side, but that's still pretty high. If I swivel those around, we can have a look and see how high we can kind of get the arms up. Just get that one. Yeah, that one is actually cutting in a little bit. You can see the angles being different in this position as well. I can get this one up a lot closer to the head. This one is really being sort of pushed out by that strap. Not that I'm going to be raising their arms up quite as much. I always think of that as being a bit more of a Tusken Raider type pose, getting the arms up. But yeah, we do have just a little bit of restriction from that bandolier strap on that particular right shoulder. Moving on to the elbows. I think this is an important one. So not terribly deep in terms of the angle here that robe sculpting is hitting on the inside of the elbow there. You can see the articulation being exposed here in the back. As expected, it looks pretty good from the front though, but yeah, we're not getting sort of tight, not sort of raising the hand up to the face. We can swivel, of course, as we would hope. There we can sort of swivel those around so we can kind of get the hands closer. But again, these straps being so close around the waist means that we're not really getting the elbows as tight to the body as we might on some other figures. That is about as close together as I can get the hands in this particular position. I can't squeeze them any tighter because we've got this in the way. That one's not really getting in the way. It's mostly this pouch and a little bit of the pouches on this side as well. But they don't hold lightsabers, or at least this A New Hope version won't be holding a lightsaber. We've got blasters instead. But if you're hoping to make a Jawa Jedi, I don't think it's going to get a two-handed grip on a lightsaber. But yeah, okay, so now we've gone to the waist. That's a pretty smooth movement. I can spin that all the way around. So perhaps if you really wanted to mix things up, you could display a Jawa with its robe turned around to give a slightly different appearance. Though of course at the front we've got that section where we sort of have the robe closure where it overlaps. But if you really want to mix things up, perhaps you could turn this one to the front. Though of course we do have that foot peeking out there in the back. So for me, I'm going to have it there. We do just have a tiny bit of that closure visible just above that midline. I do like to have my sculpted pieces lining up, so I'm probably not really going to utilize the articulation. It doesn't really look too different because it's just such a solid column. If the legs are shown, you can really kind of see the differences in poses, but because we can't see the legs, I don't know that turning it is actually going to give us a terribly different look. We're just going to simply turn the whole figure around because just the way that the foot is visible, I just think it looks better when it's all lined up, and I like to keep those sculpted lines in line with themselves. So that's pretty much all the articulation. I really am struggling to see any articulation. I think there's maybe something at the knees and maybe something at the hips, but I feel like that's more of just the way that they've assembled the figure because I cannot see or feel. I did a little quick test when I got it out of the bubble, and I just can't get enough of a grip on the feet to really feel, because I'm worried about, especially since this one is visible, I don't want to like accidentally snap off an attachment point because then it's going to be impossible to get it back in. And this foot is visible with that sculpted sort of section there of the robe. I don't want to break anything, but it's just not moving. If I'm trying to turn that foot around, I'm actually sort of more turning the whole torso section there. I'm just sort of turning the skirt. So that's really not anything under there. I don't even know if you'd even be able to cut this off. I know for some collectors, when they have that sort of flexible rubbery section, they're sort of inclined to sort of cut that off and maybe add on a soft goods version. But I get the feeling this feels really solid, particularly around the hips. I don't know that you'd even be able to cut this off. It just feels so solid, to be honest. I don't even think there's hip articulation to be exposed under there. It's really dark and hard to show, but But yeah, if I manage to get a better sort of lit photo showing the inside of the skirt, I'll pop that up, but it's just really hard to show because it's just completely just so dark in there, and it just really doesn't feel like there's anything under there. So we've basically got very minimal articulation at the head, we've got reasonable articulation at the arms, and just that sort of swivel around at the waist. But of course we do have hands as well. So looking at these tiny little Jawa hands, I'm not sure that we have any side to side or up and down sort of additional articulation. I certainly don't see it. They've got very small hands because they're smaller scale than humanoid characters, but we do just have that rotation. But it doesn't look like, sometimes we have those little rockers that let us do this motion or this motion, but their hands are so small. I do like the way that they are attached into the robes. We're not looking too far down, but it doesn't look awkward and not too flat across. And we've got just that sort of swivel articulation. I forgot to mention, looking at it sort of earlier, looking at the hand grips, because of course we've got blaster pistols, and that usually means that we've got an extended trigger finger, mostly on the right hand. That's where most characters sort of tend to hold their blaster accessories. This one's got a slightly hooked trigger finger, but it's not separate. As soon as we kind of get into the knuckles, it's just resting alongside the other fingers, so it's not separate. Though of course we don't have an enclosed trigger guard on the ion blaster, so that's not really going to affect us for that one. But jumping ahead a little bit, we do have this tiny little blaster pistol accessory that does have an enclosed trigger guard, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. Now the hand on this left hand side is a little bit more of a classic wider grip. I'm really hoping we'll get a two-handed grip on that ion blaster, because I think that that's going to look really cool. So to be honest, let's just jump ahead because I'm really intrigued by this little tiny blaster pistol. It's really small, and usually with these small accessories, there's somewhere to sort of stow them on the character. But going through all of these sort of strapping and bandoliers, we've got this wide holster here for the ion cannon, the ion blaster. This just is so small. It's not going to fit in there. So I'm not quite sure where I'm going to sort of put it. I like to be able to sort of stow accessories on the figure. It's always a little bit, you know, extra work to go and sort of store this somewhere labeled so I don't lose it. I know which figure it matches up to, and it's just so small. It is made out of, I think it's just, it kind of looks slightly metallic, a dark gunmetal, sort of silvery grey. It's got kind of soft details, but that's not surprising because of its small scale. It's pretty hard to show the details here. It's kind of got like a DL44 type emitter here and a very circular enclosed trigger guard there. So I think this could look fun in the Jawa hand because it's so small, and I'm going to try and sort of get this into it. But because we don't have that separate sort of separate trigger finger, I don't know that it's going to necessarily look quite as cool, because I'm trying to kind of line it up with that finger, but the finger is not hooked enough to get it in there, which is a shame because that's such a clear circle there. The Jawa fingers are quite small. If it was separate, I think that they would hook through very easily. But yeah, we've got a tiny little blaster pistol there for this Jawa to hold. You can see it is a different color to the hands. I have to say, I think the hands on this figure are dark brown, just seeing it in contrast to that grey blaster pistol. It's kind of fun. Personally, I don't think I'm actually going to really use this particular accessory. Just going to quickly see if it will be held in the other hand. You can kind of hold it in the left hand. It's again a bit awkward because that trigger finger is not extended there. It's kind of holding more onto the grip, but it does fit into the hand. It's not as tight as the right hand, the dominant hand, but it's not going to fall out either. So you can kind of do, I guess, a double sort of blaster wielding Jawa there if you really want. But of course, this is what I think of for a blaster accessory for a Jawa. We've got the ion blaster, really cool. We've got a tiny little more of sort of an extended trigger here. It's not enclosed, it's not circular. We've got a nice little cutout detail here, which is nice. We've got that sort of flared emitter here, which has a little bit of a recess to it, which is nice. I don't like blasters that just sort of end flat. It doesn't look realistic. And we've got a brown paintwork here for the grip there. It looks like this is made out of black plastic just because of the way it kind of goes into the emitter there. there. So I believe this is brown paint here for the emitter rather than the other way around. Overall looks pretty nice. We don't have a lot of fine detail, but I do like this cutout section. I think that looks pretty nice. So let's hope that this Jawa figure is going to hold it well. We've got these rotations at the wrist, so I'm hoping we'll get a really cool pose. I do go a little bit carefully with these ones because I don't want to break little fingers or potentially sort of bend the blaster accessories. This one has a little bit of a wiggle kind of at this point where it's at its thinnest in terms of the grip, and the thumb on this one is a little bit, the thumb on this Jawa is just very sort of fitted in and sort of slender. So just kind of pushing it into the hands, we get to that kind of pose. Actually, before I try and do a two-handed pose, I'm going to try it in that holster, but that looks pretty cool. Of course, if we sort of play around with the elbow and the position of the hands, we'll probably get into a slightly different position. Looks pretty cool. I'm just going to, before I do a two-handed grip, let's try it out in this holster. So if I sort of pull that open and sort of slide this in, what does it look like? Well, that's not too bad. It's such a large blaster for the size of the Jawa. I was always a little bit worried it's going to look really odd, sort of holstered at this side. Comes up a little bit higher, but that's not too bad. It fits just a little bit open, so it doesn't sort of sit closed. I might be able to squeeze that tighter a little bit, but it kind of sits like that. That's not too bad if you want to sort of have them working with a droid or perhaps holding that other little blaster pistol. They can have this one stowed at the side. I think that looks pretty cool, but of course I do love to see my figures holding their accessories in kind of a bit of an action stance. So I'm just going to try and kind of get the Jawa into a bit of a blaster pistol holding pose here. So it's not a secure grip because we don't have a finger to sort of hook into a trigger guard there, and I'm hoping if I can sort of wiggle the hand around, we might be able to sort of have it holding onto the narrow part of the emitter. So there we go. That wasn't actually as hard as I thought. It kind of looks a little bit more like it's presenting the blaster to me rather than sort of aiming it. But of course, this is just a very quick attempt. I'll certainly spend a little bit of time, as I usually do, sort of tweaking my figures and poses before I add them to my display. I'll put some better posed photos in here after I've spent a bit of time working with it. I'm always sort of very careful, especially with the very small hands and fingers of these smaller scale figures. I think that looks pretty cool. And I'm very happy that it can actually grip around this sort of wider section here. I thought I might have to grip around this tiny section here, which I don't want to break because we've got that really thin little attachment point there, but that looks pretty good. And I'm not actually sort of bending it. Sometimes when you've got the two-handed grips, you end up kind of curving the accessory to kind of bridge it between the two hands there. That looks pretty straight, which is good. And now I've got a Jawa with a blaster ready to go take over some droids. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with this tiny little blaster pistol. I can't stow it on the figure. It's going to fall through the holster there, so I'll probably tuck that one away. But of course, now that I've got a Jawa, we're going to see next to a couple of other figures. So I have R5-D4. This is the vintage collection version that came out in the Mandalorian line. So this one's a little bit more recent, but I think that that's really quite fun. The Jawa's a little bit taller than R5-D4 here. I think that looks quite good. And of course, let's see it alongside a sort of standard human height figure. I've got a stormtrooper here. Of course, a little bit somber here. Of course, these stormtroopers do attack the Jawas in A New Hope. Off screen, we don't see it happen, but they are a pretty good standard kind of height figure there. So you can kind of see how this Jawa looks alongside the kind of standard height figures in the 3.75 inch line and some astromech figures there. So I like that height. I know proportion and scale can be a really tricky thing across all of the collectible lines. Some figures are too tall, you know, the helmets can be too big or too small, but I think this is a pretty good height. Of course, if you're going to army build, they're all going to be identically heighted Jawas, which is, you know, I would love to see, you know, Hasbro do some sort of army building packs though. Of course, in saying that, we know that we are going to get a new Jawa figure with the Streets of Mos Eisley playset. market. I'm very excited about that because I love Jawas. Adding new and different ones to my collection is always fun. I might end up getting a couple of those play sets to kind of build out a little bit of a diorama so I can have a couple of Jawas to add to my collection. Really excited about this whole sort of focus on a Tatooine this year. That Mos Eisley playset looks amazing, and of course the Mos Eisley Cantina HasLab playset diorama that's just going to be absolutely amazing. So of course, while I was disappointed about the backing card for this particular figure because I really wanted to keep him as a carded example, I was never able to find a second one to open. So I guess now that I know that there's going to be so much cool Mos Eisley Tatooine stuff coming out this year, it feels like the right time to finally open this one up so I can build out my array of figures to really build an impressive Mos Eisley diorama when I get my hands on that HasLab and that street scene. So this looks really cool. I'm going to tweak the position of this blaster a little bit better, but I'm really happy with it. Very limited articulation, but you do find that on these smaller figures. It doesn't bother me so much about the feet. The robe fits very solidly, so it just sits up nice and straight. And to be honest, when you're dealing with figures, I don't actually mind every now and again just having a figure that's very solid and doesn't worry me about tipping over. It doesn't feel like this one's going to tip over at all. So that's always a relief. I don't need to go rushing out and buying a stand to get this one to stand up without falling over. So it's so cute. I love Jawas. I wish I could have found more of this one, but I'm happy to have this one for my collection. I like being able to check off all of those VC numbers in my collection so I can add this one to my display finally after spending too long on that poor sad backing card there. So this was fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure and had a lot of fun checking out the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I've also opened up the R5D4 figure, VC303. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.